Welcome to a world hidden in plain sight. Smoke hung low over the sprawling fields of Maryland, the air thick with the acrid scent of burned sugar cane lingering like a memory that refused to die. In the early morning hush, a cabin sat at the edge of the forest, weathered logs blackened by decades of sun and storm. Inside, shadows clung to the corners as if they too were afraid to move. A man, his back straight and eyes sharp, paced slowly, fingers brushing the rough-hewn walls, tracing the stories etched into every fiber of the timber. He was a slave, yet not entirely bound, for in his chest beat a heart that knew it belonged to freedom. His name was whispered cautiously in the surrounding plantations, spoken only in the dark between breaths of fear and hope. Frederick Douglass, 1845. Maryland. Before we begin, take a moment to mark where you are watching from and the hour on your clock. Because as this story unfolds, you will walk the same paths, breathe the same air, feel the same tension, the same anticipation. The shadows of Maryland, 1845, are alive, and they are waiting for you to listen. The chains that had once shackled his limbs had left marks on his body, invisible now to the casual observer, yet engraved deep into his resolve. There was a fire in his gaze, a hunger that could not be quelled by lash or threat, a knowledge that the world beyond these fields was larger and waiting. And as the dawn crept over the horizon, spilling light over the damp earth, over the hidden paths that twisted into the woods, a question hung in the mist. How does a man escape a life that has claimed his name, his identity, his very soul, and leave behind a legacy that the world would remember long after the echoes of chains have faded? Whispers traveled across the plantations. Rumors of a man who read secretly, who questioned openly, who dreamed of a life beyond the cane fields. People spoke in hushed tones of nights when he would disappear into the woods, returning with words and knowledge that belonged to no master. Yet the more they whispered, the more the legend grew. The question remained: could one man alone defy the weight of an entire system and rewrite history, without ever being caught, without ever losing himself? Maryland, 1845. The heat of midsummer pressed down on the earth like a weight bending the air in shimmering waves. The sun barely crested the horizon, and already the fields were alive with sound, the rhythmic scrape of hoes against stubborn soil, the low murmur of voices speaking in hurried whispers, the occasional sharp bark of a dog patrolling the edges of the plantation. Smoke from the early fires coiled lazily into the sky, carrying the pungent scent of burnt cane and wet earth. Each cabin, though small and crude, stood as a witness to generations of toil. Logs blackened by sunrain and fire told stories of endurance of lives compressed into the narrow spaces of these wooden walls. Inside, the smell of sweat and worn fabric mingled with the faint aroma of cooking fires, a testament to daily survival. Fact, the cabins were overcrowded, windows shuttered against both heat and eyes. Folklore shadows seemed to move within whispering secrets of those who vanished in the night. The plantation house, stark and whitewashed, loomed at the center of it all. Its wide veranda glinted in the morning light, a symbol of authority, power, and watchfulness. Overseers moved along its periphery, clipboards in hand, recording absences, noting minor infractions, cataloging the labor of men and women who had no say in their own hours. Their footsteps struck a pattern that was both predictable and oppressive. Yet even in the shadow of this authority, subtle signs of resistance existed. A hand missing from a row of sugarcane, a tool misplaced, footprints on paths that should have been clear. Fact, official logs recorded deviations, yet rarely captured intent. Folklore locals whispered of spirits who intervened, of shadows that guided or protected those daring to defy the masters. Beyond the fields, the forest pressed in. Dense oaks, towering maples, and undergrowth thick with brambles created a labyrinth of both refuge and peril. Every path, every clearing, every bend in the stream carried meaning. The forest itself became a map, a code for those who could read it. Birds and insects marked time their movements, indicators of approaching danger or opportunity. The wind passing through cane and leaves carried more than sound. It carried secrets, lessons, warnings. Fact slaves occasionally fled into these woods, returning or disappearing forever. Folklore legends spoke of spirits, lights dancing among the trees, guiding or punishing those who walked unprepared. The line between the tangible and the supernatural blurred, teaching caution and courage simultaneously. Frederick Douglass moved within this world with acute awareness. His quarters, a small cabin at the edge of the plantation, were modest, yet fortified with knowledge. A simple cot, a wooden table, and beneath the floorboards, hidden books, scraps of writing letters smuggled from sympathetic outsiders. Each book read was a rebellion. Each letter decoded a step toward liberation. Fact literacy among slaves was forbidden, punishable by lash, or worse. Folklore, some said the very walls of his cabin whispered knowledge at night, secrets hidden in the grain of the logs, guiding the mind that dared to listen. The town nearby, a cluster of modest homes, and a single church offered both opportunity and danger. Streets were quiet in the morning, coming alive with merchants, shoppers, and workers as the sun rose higher. Market stalls brimmed with produce and textiles, the smell of bread, baking meat, roasting, and the occasional waft of something burned. Fact, some African American families lived free, some indentured and some bound by subtle agreements that skirted the edges of freedom. Folklore tales persisted of messages conveyed through song gestures or shadows of signals sent unseen to warn of patrols or to guide those seeking escape. Children learned these signs intuitively, their play a blend of learning and survival. At night, the plantation transformed. A heavy humidity enveloped the land, thick and clinging. Cicadas sang in unison, their drone punctuated by the calls of night birds and the distant howl of a wolf. Lanterns swung gently outside cabins, casting elongated shadows over paths and walls. Fact patrols moved quietly through fields, seeking signs of runaways. Folklore. It was said that spirits of ancestors walked alongside those brave enough to move through the dark, whispering warnings and encouragement alike. The wind carried more than the scent of crops. It carried stories, prayers, songs, and memory. Every detail of the environment became a teacher. The riverbank offered a mirror to the sky, but also concealed its own dangers. Currents could hide footprints or betray the faintest disturbance. Stones arranged by someone long gone became markers for escape. Fact. Douglass studied the land meticulously, learning paths, patrol routines, and natural hiding spots. Folklore elders told of the river spirits who could mislead or protect, of trees that remembered each footstep, of birds that sang of coming peril. Fact and folklore intertwined, shaping knowledge and instinct simultaneously. The people themselves were both anchor and inspiration. Women and men worked tirelessly, faces lined with hardship, eyes wary yet alive. They shared stories, quietly songs that held lessons, whispered warnings, prayers for courage. Fact, these exchanges were informal, hidden from the overseer's gaze. Folklore songs carried encoded directions, warnings in rhythm, history, and melody. A single word, a pause, a hum, could contain centuries of knowledge. Douglass absorbed it all, the land, the people, the shadowed spaces between the unspoken rules that governed survival. And so the stage was fully set. Fields and cabins, islands and forest, river and sky, the living and the departed. Fact and folklore running side by side. Every scent, every sound, every shadow played a role. The air itself seemed to hum with possibility and peril. And Frederick Douglass, alert, calculating, patient, ready to take the first steps into a larger world, a world where courage, intellect, and intuition would converge. A world where one man could challenge centuries of oppression. The morning mist hung thick over the cane fields of Maryland. droplets clinging to leaves glinting faintly like tiny stars suspended in the air. Fact plantation records meticulously documented labor. Yet among the columns of dates, names, and hours, worked gaps appeared. Entries marked simply as absent fate, unknown, or unaccounted for. Names erased from the ledger, lives compressed into a footnote, yet leaving echoes that traveled between cabins and through whispers at night. Folklore elders spoke of shadows that moved independently of lights, flickering in the forest, where no flame existed, guiding or warning those who dared to venture beyond the beaten path. Some said the spirits of the disappeared returned to observe their presence, felt as a sudden chill or the rustle of unseen wings. Douglass memorized these absences, tracing patterns with a mind sharper than any overseer could comprehend. Fact, runaway slave advertisements described height scars, eye color, peculiarities of gait. A catalog of human beings reduced to physical markers. They offered rewards, monetary incentives for recapture, a stark reminder of the stakes. Folklore oral narratives transformed these same details into riddles, clues hidden in song or story. A scar became a signal, a walk through reeds, a coded path. Children listened to these stories, internalizing rhythm and pattern. Adults shared them in whispers, a secret curriculum of survival, courage, and cunning. At night, the plantation seemed alive in ways unseen by the master's gaze. Fact patrols moved in predictable circuits, their lanterns casting narrow cones of light, shadows breaking against the earth, but leaving spaces untouched, unobserved. Douglass walked these areas in his mind, noting where the light failed, where sound carried or was muffled by trees and walls. Folklore spirits were said to guide the fleeing, leaving signs, invisible to the uninitiated. A shifted stone, a breeze carrying a whispered song, a firefly hovering in a deliberate pattern. The forest became a teacher, a partner, a guide. Within the cabins, the human element interwove with these lessons. Fact families hid knowledge, shared it clandestinely from one generation to the next. The sound of a song or a line of verse could encode directions, warnings, or news from distant places. Folklore ghost stories reinforced moral lessons, taught vigilance, patience, courage. Stories of ancestors walking beside the living, of apparitions appearing to protect the righteous, of spirits observing, waiting, guiding. Each story layered reality with meaning. Each whispered secret a step toward freedom or a lesson in consequence. Douglass absorbed everything. He watched the masters and overseers, noting habits, routines, and weaknesses. Fact observations of guard schedules, patrol patterns, timing of work calls, river crossings. Folklore tales of phantom figures appearing where least expected, of sudden lights dancing along paths, of animals behaving strangely, interpreted as omens. Every human movement, every sound, every shift of wind became a signal. Every signal a potential key to escape. The interplay of hard fact and subtle folklore sharpened his mind, taught him patience, calculation, observation, and most importantly, strategy. Along the river, the water mirrored the sky, yet hid dangers beneath its surface. Fact currents could betray a footprint, conceal evidence, or challenge the unwary traveler. Folklore spirits of the river were said to either protect or mislead, rewarding attentiveness, courage, and ingenuity. Stones arranged by past travelers became markers. Reeds bent in certain ways carried silent messages. These lessons were encoded in nature, in movement, in sound, and in the stories passed down by those who had dared before. Whispers spoke of the phantom regiment units, of soldiers who fought, vanished, or returned only in legend. Fact reports existed of African American soldiers whose fates were poorly recorded, lost in bureaucratic oversight, unacknowledged by the official record. Folklore. These phantoms became symbols of endurance, courage, and the persistence of human spirit. Dreams, visions, and ghostly apparitions inspired awe and provided guidance. For Douglass, the interplay of record and myth created a map, a curriculum for survival. for understanding the movements of both men and shadows. Inside his own small cabin, Douglass curated knowledge with painstaking care. Fact-hidden books, letters smuggled from outsiders, scraps of writing preserved beneath floorboards. Folklore, whispered stories claimed the walls themselves, imparted wisdom at night, creaking and groaning in ways that seemed almost sentient, offering subtle guidance to those who listened carefully. Every detail, every sound, every shadow, every word became part of his education. Not merely to survive, but to plan, to strategize, to imagine a life beyond the plantation. And so the stage was fully alive. The field, the forest, the river, the cabins, the town. Fact and folklore interweaving seamlessly. Each absence, each whispered warning, each story and song, each observation. All of it prepared Douglass to navigate both the tangible and intangible, to walk the line between history and legend, to step into a world where intelligence, courage, and perception might grant him something more than survival, something approaching freedom. The first disappearance occurred just past the eastern edge of the cane fields. In fact, a young man barely 17 was scheduled to begin his day's labor, but never appeared. Overseers scoured the rows, checking the perimeter fences, shouting names into the early light. The ledger would later record fate unknown. Yet the truth was more complex. Folklore whispers among the cabins spoke of a shadow moving silently through the undergrowth, guiding the boy along a hidden path. Lanterns swung, dogs barked, but nothing disturbed the mist that clung to the ground. The forest itself seemed to swallow him, and yet some swore they saw him later, briefly, on a ridge where the light fell, just so disappearing again as if the earth itself had claimed him. A few nights later, in a town not far from the plantation, another incident unfolded. Fact, several families reported missing livestock doors, unlatched. Small items gone from kitchens and sheds. Newspapers recorded nothing significant, only that anomalies were noted without explanation. Folklore locals murmured of the fire spirits, the Ngon Luama dancing across fields and alleyways, flames that appeared without fuel moving in patterns that suggested intent. Children claimed to see figures in the glow. Adults dismissed them as hallucination or superstition. Yet fear lingered tangible in the air, heavy on the chest. Stories spread of an unseen hand protecting the vulnerable, punishing the careless. Doubling caution and imagination in the minds of those who witnessed even indirectly. In another incident, a detachment of African American soldiers newly recruited was stationed along the border of a contested property. Fact, official military reports indicated alarms sounded without cause, a flurry of activity at night. But no enemy encountered, no explanation recorded. Folklore veterans told of phantom soldiers, echoes of past battles marching silently alongside the living, their footsteps in rhythm with the heartbeats of those awake. Shadows of men in blue and gray would appear at the periphery, visible only in peripheral vision, vanishing when directly observed. The young soldiers whispered to one another about visions in the dark, the feel of unseen comrades, and the sense that they were part of something greater than orders or maps. Douglass himself observed these events with a careful mind. Fact, he noted patrols timing the locations of the missing and the reactions of overseers and townsfolk alike. Folklore. He listened to stories, songs, and half-remembered tales passed in cabins. One woman recounted how her great-grandmother had seen a man vanish into the swamp guided by a light no lantern could produce, emerging days later on the outskirts of another town, unharmed, carrying news and supplies. Another spoke of a child who disappeared for a night, only to be found sitting by a river, humming a tune that seemed to carry messages, directions, and warnings. Each story added a layer of understanding, a puzzle piece in the larger map of survival. These incidents were not isolated. Fact, absentee reports, missing tools, damaged fences, and patrol logs created a trail of anomalies that suggested both human agency and failure of control. Folklore, spectral figures guiding lights and songs at night, all reinforced the idea that some force, tangible or not, was influencing events. The combination of observed reality and whispered narrative created tension, anticipation, and a sense that the world was not entirely predictable. One night a man escaped under cover of storm. Fact, rain washed away footprints, the wind drowned sound, and patrols were unprepared for the sudden chaos. Folklore. It was said that spirits moved with him, carrying him along safe paths, diverting attention, masking his scent, and offering reassurance in the form of whispers or the sudden appearance of a firefly guiding the way. The plantation would wake to an empty cabin, a missing worker, and a ledger noting fate unknown. But the story persisted in song and rumor, carrying courage to those left behind. The cumulative effect of these rising incidents created a network of observation, instinct, and legend. Fact, every disappearance increased vigilance, every minor act of defiance was recorded. Yet enforcement was imperfect, leaving gaps. Folklore, every story strengthened communal knowledge, teaching strategy, caution, and hope. Douglass internalized both, noting learning, connecting the threads between the factual record and the whispered narrative. Each mini-case became a lesson, a warning, a confirmation that the world was larger than the plantation, the forest, the fences, and the overseers. By mid-season, the plantation itself seemed alive with tension. Fact reports indicated repeated absences, missing tools, unaccounted labor, and strange nocturnal activity. Folklore, whispers of lights moving on their own sounds, of footsteps where none should be, trees that seemed to shift, rearranging themselves to confuse or protect. Douglass observed patterns, testing hypotheses, blending practical knowledge with inherited wisdom. The landscape became a living classroom, teaching navigation, caution, observation, and patience. And in these incidents, small victories were claimed, not in official records, but in memory, in rumor, in the confidence that one could act without being wholly observed, that freedom might be possible in both body and mind. The tension built steadily. Fact patrols increased, overseers grew frustrated. Warnings became more frequent, and yet every documented measure was matched by an equally powerful intangible. Folklore, spirits, shadows, songs, whispers, and visions. A parallel reality that both guided and tested. Douglass moved through this world with acute awareness, his senses honed by both tangible evidence and the intangible signals passed through story and legend. Each mini-case a trial, each escape a lesson, preparing him for larger movements, greater challenges, and the ultimate confrontation with a system that sought to deny humanity itself. And so the stage for the coming crescendo was set. Fields, forests, rivers, cabins, towns, shadows, songs. Fact and folklore intertwined. Each incident teaching strategy, resilience, observation, and courage. And Frederick Douglass, ever watchful, ever learning, preparing for the moment when knowledge, skill, and bravery would converge. The rising incidents were not mere accidents. They were the shaping forces of a mind destined to escape, to teach, to lead, to rewrite history itself. The late afternoon sun stretched across Maryland, turning the cane fields into a sea of gold and shadow. The wind carried the scent of earth, sweat, and smoldering wood. Fact reports had accumulated for weeks, men and women unaccounted for, tools missing, patrol logs noting anomalies, fate unknown, entries multiplying. Overseers scowled, cross-checking ledgers, retracing steps, interrogating workers. Yet the pattern eluded them. Folklore whispers traveled like smoke through the cabins. Shadows moving on their own lights, flickering in the forest at night, guiding or warning, sometimes saving, sometimes haunting. Stories of spirits observing, whispering, nudging the brave, along paths unseen, passed from one generation to the next, carried the weight of ancestors and the hopes of the living. Frederick Douglass walked these same paths with a precision born of patience and study. Fact, he had memorized patrol rotations, noting the rhythms of overseer routines. The timing of work calls, the locations of fences, and river crossings. He mapped the terrain in his mind, cataloging every tree, every stone, every bend in the river, every break in the canopy. Folklore, he also recalled the coded meanings in songs and stories. Tales of lights dancing in the dark shadows, moving independently, spirits appearing to guide or guard. He knew when to move, when to pause, when to wait. Each decision weighed with consequence. The first sign came as a drumbeat in the distance, faint at first, carried across the marshes by the humid evening air. Fact, a militia detachment had scheduled exercises near the patrol route, creating a brief window of opportunity for those who could read timing and terrain. Douglass noted the drumbeat's rhythm, the shifts in shadows, the flicker of lanterns far off. Folklore villagers murmured that drums sometimes served as signals, messages from unseen guides alerting the cautious to imminent danger or opportunity. The convergence of reality and legend sharpened his senses. Awareness became a weapon. And the forest, the river, the cabins, and the fields all spoke in code to those who knew how to listen. As he moved toward the riverbank, the water gleamed under the setting sun. Fact currents could betray footprints, conceal evidence, or present hazards to the unwary. Douglass calculated the depth, the flow, the hidden obstacles. Folklore tales of ancestors walking the river guided the steps of those who had the courage to trust them. A stone out of place became a marker. Reeds bent in a particular formation, a signal. Fireflies blinking in a pattern, a message. The land itself became a teacher, a co-conspirator, an ally in the act of liberation. Each moment demanded attention, patience, and interpretation. Suddenly a gust rustled the cane. A branch snapped somewhere distant. Fact patrols could detect the faintest sound a mistake could mean, capture punishment, or worse. Douglass froze, listening, assessing. Every rustle, every distant call, every glint of light through leaves. Folklore, the spirits moved with him unseen, but present, guiding, nudging, testing. Shadows seemed to shift, reposition themselves, creating paths of safety. The night became both classroom and crucible, teaching resilience, perception, and courage. Across the fields, cabins, and forest edges, incidents compounded. Fact, men had vanished for hours or days, returning with small gifts, warnings, knowledge, or simply disappearing entirely. Overseers noted the gaps in records, but could find no logical explanation. Folklore. The vanished were said to be aided by spirits, lights moving through trees with intention, footprints appearing and disappearing, songs carrying encoded directions through the night air. These tales, though unverifiable by official record, reinforced community knowledge and survival tactics. Each story became a lesson, a warning, a spark of hope. Douglass approached the edge of the forest where the land opened to the river. Fact patrols were temporarily diverted, creating a narrow corridor of movement. His steps were measured, deliberate, calculated to match both observation and instinct. Folklore, ancestral spirits, the phantom regiment, and shadowed guides all converged in his consciousness. Their presence unseen, their influence undeniable. He felt the pulse of the land, the rhythm of history pressing against him, urging caution, patience, and daring. Each breath, each heartbeat synced with both ledger and legend. Then came the most critical moment. Fact, a patrol unexpectedly altered its route, moving closer to the path he intended to take. Douglass hesitated, assessing, calculating. The window was shrinking. Folklore, the whispers returned, the familiar voices in the wind, the dancing lights, the flutter of leaves that signaled safety or danger. Every detail mattered. The sway of a tree, the alignment of a stone, the glint of water in the moonlight. All became a map. All became a test of courage and intuition. He advanced slowly, shadows stretching across the ground, mingling with twilight. Fact, the final stretch of the field was exposed, no cover for 100 yards, the patrol's torches swinging dangerously near. Folklore, he felt them. The unseen guides, the spirits of ancestors, phantom soldiers from forgotten skirmishes, moving alongside him, invisibly guarding, observing. Each step forward was a dance between tangible danger and spectral assistance. Every heartbeat carried the tension of centuries of oppression and hope. Crossing the riverbank, Douglass paused. Fact, the water flowed swiftly, dark and reflective. One misstep could reveal him. Folklore. The river itself had become a participant, whispering its guidance, masking his scent, carrying away the evidence of presence. He stepped lightly, guided by memory, instinct, and legend. Each movement a confluence of fact and myth, precision and trust, courage and intelligence. And finally, reaching the other side, he paused again. The forest closed behind him, concealing his passage. Fact, all that remained were footprints that would soon vanish, the ledger's notes and the faintest impressions in the mud. Folklore songs carried on the wind, stories that would be told to others, spirits watching from the shadows, nodding approval. The climax was not an explosion or a confrontation. It was a meticulous negotiation with space-time and myth. A culmination of every lesson learned, every observation made, every whisper remembered. The moment embodied the bridge between worlds. Fact and folklore converging. History and legend meeting. Freedom and danger entwined. Douglass had navigated the tangible and intangible, the documented and the whispered, emerging on the far side with both knowledge and liberation. The land, the people, the stories, and the spirits all bore witness. And in this liminal space, the narrative paused, teetering on the edge of consequence, ready to unfold into the aftermath that would echo for decades. The dawn after his crossing was quiet, deceptively so. Fact patrols would scour the fields and forest edges for days, noting missing laborers, tools, and livestock. Ledgers recorded fate unknown, as though absence could be reduced to ink and paper. Yet the reality was more complex. Douglass had vanished, but his presence lingered in the consciousness of those who remained. Folklore, whispers of lights dancing at night, shadows moving with intention, and songs rising from the cabins told of his passage. They were warnings, stories, lessons, proof that courage and cunning could defy the rigid structures of oppression. The plantation continued its daily grind, but tension had shifted. Fact overseers walked more carefully, noting every movement, scanning every shadow, fearing anomalies. Folklore elders spoke of eyes that watched beyond the physical, of spirits guiding those daring to act, and of ancestral hands shaping events unseen. Children learned quickly which songs carried hidden meaning, which paths were safe, and which shadows to trust or avoid. The blend of reality and legend created a subtle resistance, invisible yet undeniable, carried in memory and gesture. Douglass's disappearance sent ripples outward. Fact records of missing persons grew, patrol reports noted discrepancies. Townspeople murmured about the missing man who had moved through their streets without notice. Folklore, the story became myth, a tale told at night to teach lessons in courage, observation, and survival. Songs were composed, lines of poetry, whispered narratives formed that intertwined the real and the imagined. His passage became a template, a guide for those seeking freedom, a reminder that the human spirit could navigate both seen and unseen dangers. Over the years, the echoes persisted. Fact, some who followed his path were caught, punished, or disappeared. Others reached safety, carrying knowledge and stories that would survive generations. Folklore. The spirits of the forest, river, and fields continued to be invoked in song and story. Parents told their children of figures who moved silently through the night, of lights that guided the faithful, of shadows that protected the courageous. Every anecdote reinforced vigilance, cunning, and hope. The physical record remained incomplete, but the narrative lived on, stronger and more enduring than any ledger. In towns and cities far from the plantations, the memory persisted. Fact letters, clandestine meetings, and underground networks recorded movements and news of those seeking freedom. Douglass's example informed strategy education and leadership. Folklore dreams spoke of guidance visions of ancestors and phantom companions who walked unseen alongside the brave. Spirituals sung in hidden corners echoed his footsteps. Melodies layered with meaning carrying warnings, instructions, and encouragement across space and time. Every note, every rhythm, a map, a lesson, a legacy. The broader landscape of freedom and struggle felt the ripple. Fact, the abolitionist movement gained momentum. Newspapers began publishing accounts, activists shared strategies. Douglass's eventual voice, recorded in speeches and writings, amplified what had been whispered in shadows. Folklore. The mythic aura surrounding his figure grew, inspiring stories that blended history and legend. Ghost tales, dream narratives, and songs became intertwined with historical record, ensuring that courage, defiance, and ingenuity would be remembered even when the ledger failed to capture it. Even decades later, the echoes were felt. Fact descendants, scholars and historians traced movements, mapped paths, studied letters, and reconstructed events. Yet gaps remained, spaces marked fate unknown, inviting interpretation, reflection, and reverence. Folklore spirituals continued to be sung, ghost stories retold, the land remembered. The same rivers and forests held memory, carrying the weight of experience, the testimony of survival, and the promise of freedom. Each telling reinforced the convergence of fact and legend, shaping the cultural memory. And now, as we leave Maryland behind the echoes of 1845, remain fact. Douglass's passage marked a turning point both for him and for those inspired to follow. The historical record, fragmentary, though it may be, confirms courage, strategy, and the pursuit of freedom. Folklore. The stories that grew from his journey persist in song, tale, and dream. The shadows of his footsteps still linger in fields along riverbanks and in the imagination of those willing to remember. The line between fact and legend, past and present, is blurred, yet both testify to human resilience. Before we end, take a moment to reflect on what you have witnessed. The interplay of history and myth, the courage, the vigilance, the whispered songs, and the unseen guides. Ask yourself, how do the lessons of Frederick Douglass's journey speak to us now? How do the echoes of those shadows shape our understanding of freedom, courage, and legacy? And as the spirituals continue to rise from the past, remember that the story is never truly finished. It lives in memory, in song, in shadow, and in each of us who chooses to listen carefully. You have just heard one of the many records from a history that is never fully closed. If you wish to explore more, to follow the footsteps, the shadows, and the stories, subscribe and continue the journey. The echoes remain, waiting for those who dare to pay attention, and for those who do. The past speaks.